Hard fact, most project management guidance falls apart in the real world. And I know this because a lot of what made me successful as a project manager didn't come from PM textbooks. It came from problem solving in other fields, actually. Places like sales, analytics, tech, business. Those perspectives actually took me from being an analyst to a senior PM to leading teams of project managers within 5 years. And now I want to put that thinking to the test in public. In this series, I'm going to take questions from Reddit and other PM forums and try to answer some of the toughest ones the way that a real project manager would actually think about them. No textbook answers, no certification fluff, no research, just real world PM problem solving. So if you've ever had a question nobody ever gave you a straight answer to, this series is for you. Let's get into it. Okay, so one thing I like to do is come on Reddit and scroll through a few questions just to see what people are talking about. And I found that it's great content actually. As I start to answer some of these questions, I could probably bring this to the YouTube channel and start to answer some of those questions here as well. Okay, now the first question here is kind of I would say a godsend because, I do promote the training that we have here at AIMPM, but this person is asking directly, and I think we can speak to this, right? So they're saying, do you have recommendations for courses teaching how to use AI in project management and or how to build use cases for AI support in project management? I'm asking you hoping you can tell me some courses that are really worth their money. Almost anything I looked at, like carelessly and randomly bundled information about AI in general, which you can teach yourself easily. I'm experimenting with Claude Code and Codex on the command line level, so I'd say I'm somewhat capable of using AI. Yet I can't bridge it to AI being really a support in my tasks rather than a fancy tool. So do you have any recommendations? Alternatively, what are your use cases? How did you build them? Ultimately here, I would recommend this person to really just go check out AIMPMtraining.com. And the reason why I would say that is because we address directly what they're talking about. Essentially, the problem with AI and sort of the way that folks are learning about it and how they're trying to relate it to project management, there's really no practical examples of how to actually do this, right? So if you go to PMI to get training on AI, they have certifications and things like that, which another question we'll address during this video. They have a training and a certification related to AI, but it's actually focused on building AI systems rather than how to use AI for project management itself. AIMPM addresses this directly, right? So we talk about how to actually do project management in the world of AI and how to use these AI systems to, do a number of different things that you need to do in project management. Everything from deliverable creation to actually doing the work itself, analysis, decision-making, building deliverables. We have tons of templates and prompts that you can actually use to pull the most out of AI based on the context of your project itself. So visit AIMPM training. This person right here, I've already put it as a response. You can check out the website and see everything there that gives you the insights into what you need to know if you're a project manager that's stepping into the world of AI and don't really know how to tie the knot between those two worlds yet. All right, so check out AIMPM. You'll find your answers there. Moving on to the next question. Okay, so this is a good one here. Agile Serp 4422 asks, how does anyone actually manage this many moving pieces? So just past my 6th month managing projects coming from a more technical role, I honestly don't get how people keep everything together. I feel like I'm constantly missing something and always one step behind what's actually happening. On paper, it looks simple. Tasks, timelines, dependencies, but in reality, it's like everything depends on something else, and half of it isn't even written down anywhere. It's also weird being responsible for delivery, but not really having control over the people doing the work. I'm expected to own the outcome, but I can't force decisions, can't unblock things myself most of the time, and still somehow it all rolls up to me. We still have tools, boards, trackers and all of that, but I'm starting to feel like they don't reflect what's actually going on. Things look in progress forever. Blockers show up too late, and I find out about issues only when there are already problems. There wasn't much onboarding either, so I've been trying to piece things together as I go. I spend a lot of time just trying to understand what matters versus what just looks important. I log in and immediately feel overwhelmed, like I should know what to do next, but I don't always trust what I'm focusing on the right thing. I've handled complex stuff before in other roles, but this feels different. Less about doing the work, more about trying to keep everything from drifting apart. Not planning to leave or anything, just trying to figure out how people actually get good at this. Right now, I'm just feeling like I'm reacting to things more than managing them. Okay, this is a very common problem that people who come from the engineering or technical roles into project management face all of the time, because you're jumping from two different worlds, essentially, right? When you're playing a technical role, your job is simple. Code this, do what people tell you to do, right? So the project manager gives you a task that you have to execute as a technical person. And essentially, that's all you really need to do. You don't have to think about the impacts per se of that code, right? Unless it's wrong and you have to fix it. So it's project manager's job to take that code and then implement it in wherever it needs to be. So you're facing a common paradox that most people that come from other career paths, especially technical ones, face in project management. And what you're feeling is normal, okay? So feeling like you're consistently missing things really means one or two things here, okay? Either you're not capturing the information that you need to along the way, and so things are getting missed and then it's coming back to bite you, or you really haven't just developed a process around how to do it accurately yet. This is a learned skill. Most project managers, as they attend meetings, they are capturing meeting minutes, they're writing things down, they're trying to document as much as they can that actually matters. That is a learned skill. A technical person, when they attend a meeting, typically they're kind of zoned out until they get asked a question or someone pops up or they have to explain something, right? But they're usually not the one presenting any minutes. They're usually not the one capturing any minutes, right? I've seen good engineers, take their own notes, but for the most part, you rely on the project manager. So the first thing you want to do is get a lot better at capturing information, whether you use AI to do that or figure out a better method of meeting minutes. These are all things that you can do to get better at capturing information. Then you have to synthesize that information. What project managers used to do was write a long set of meeting minutes, then filter through those meeting minutes and figure out what's important, what's not, and then track all of that information along the way. AI can help you do this a lot faster now. So you're actually getting into project management at a very advantageous time, because if you can capture things accurately, then you can synthesize that information into things that actually matter versus the things that don't. I think right now you're just in an information overload mode and you're catching so much incoming that your world as a technician seemed very simple compared to your world as a project manager. But again, this is normal, right? This person mentions on paper, everything looks simple. Task timelines and dependencies. And yes, these are skills that we talk about all of the time here, where it's very like the very first level, entry level, freshest, greenest project manager can create a timeline. They can create a schedule. But understanding those dependencies takes experience. It takes knowing your organization, knowing your stakeholders, knowing how people work, even knowing the technology, things that you need to have in place before other things can happen. A lot of times people won't explain these things to you. These are things you have to learn along the way or assume as you start the project. It kind of hones all back to getting a lot of that information. Once you get that information, you can figure out the dependencies. And once you understand the dependencies, those timelines will work a little bit better. But it's not just that, it's also understanding the adjustments you have to make when dependencies seem to be getting delayed, right? So it's sort of like a domino effect. And if you're able to start to develop that skill, it'll clear up a lot of confusion for you and you'll stop being less reactive and more proactive. Because if I can say this one thing will affect all of these other dependencies that I have, right? If it gets delayed, then that's the thing that I focus on. In project management, you're gonna come up against a lot of different issues. And all of them may seem important because the person talking about that issue makes it seem like it's the most important issue in the world. But you have to be able to filter out what's really important versus what isn't, okay? And that again is a learned skill in project management. So you're 6 months in, I would say stick with it. A lot of what you're going through right now will start to crystallize itself once you develop processes. And I say this all the time. Build templates, build processes, build iterative things that you can do that eventually become second nature for you. And once you get to that level, then you can really focus in on how to aggregate that information in a way that makes sense for other people. You got to make it make sense for you first before you can make it make sense for other people. All right. So stick with it. I'd say, this is normal for anyone that's starting in project management. But yes, it is possible to manage 10 projects, 12 projects at one time. I've done it before. And the only way I was able to do that was with really set up processes, good templates, and sort of just understanding the way that people like to work and then adjusting to that. That's what made my life a lot easier as a project manager. Moving on. All right, this looks like a good one here. How do you deliver bad news to a steering group when it's more than one thing at once? PM here, currently preparing for a steering group meeting where I need to report schedule slip, budget overrun, and probable scope reduction, all on the same project. I've delivered bad news before, but usually one thing at a time. Combining all three feels different. I keep going back and forth between wanting to lay it all out honestly up front versus structuring the message so that the group can absorb it without going into panic mode. Curious how other experienced PMs handled the combined bad news scenario. Do you frame it as a single story, here's what happened and why, or as three separate issues? How much do you lean on data versus narrative? How do you avoid the meeting turning into a blame-seeking session? And what do you do differently when the internal steering group versus when you have to tell the external customer later? Open to any advice, frameworks, and lessons learned. Thanks. All right, so this is a project gone wrong, right? And a lot of times when we think about projects that go wrong, we talk about them from hypothetical senses, but you can see that this is actually something that people go through all of the time. All right, so essentially, what probably happened here is that the schedule slipped, which led to a budget overrun, which led to the scope reduction because they had to cut costs. All right, so this is not necessarily three problems. That's not the way I would look at this, right? Because when you think about this, essentially the schedule slipped, which led to the budget overrun, which eventually led to the scope reduction. So you're not really talking about three issues, right? Because steering is not going to care that your schedule slipped, but they are going to care that you're spending more money than you're supposed to, and the scope of what you're building is now smaller, which means that they have less of a product to actually deliver. Okay, so that's your real problem. It's not those three issues. It's sort of just really the fact that we're spending more money to get less of a product. I wouldn't break this down to them in project management terms. You want to break this down to them in business terms, because steering is essentially, even if they are a OSPM or project management steering committee, they're really more concerned about the business, right? Leadership is concerned about the business. The business impacts the bottom line. They're not concerned about your project management jargon. All right, so that's how you kind of want to frame this. I would frame this as essentially a problem, but also with a solution. So here's the thing about going to steering committees. Unless you have a real genuine issue or decision that they need to make, you're not supposed to go there with just problems to lay them out for them to argue about, basically, or come down on you about. The easiest way to sort of escape the hellfire that you may see in a meeting like this is to come with a solution. It's not to just come with the problem. It really doesn't matter how you frame it, whether it's a single story, whether you're leaning on data versus the narrative. None of that really matters, because ultimately, if you come there without a solution to the problem, that's where you're going to catch your heat from. Problems happen. Steering knows this. They're in leadership. They've seen problems before. So ultimately, if you're coming there with that problem, the first thing that they're going to ask you is, well, what do you think we should do next? Why are they asking you instead of making the decision? Well, you're the project manager. You have much more intimate knowledge into why things went wrong, how they went wrong, and how you can fix them, right? So if you're going to explain the schedule slipping, you have to talk about why it slipped and how you can fix it. If you talk about the budget overrun, you have to talk about how much money you spent over versus how you can get it back, or how you can condense activity to compensate for the loss. If you want to talk about scope reduction, delivering a smaller product, then you have to provide the solution on how you can deliver the product that was supposed to be delivered, right? So wherever your sort of shortcomings are when you're going to steering, Your goal is to really provide the solution to how to compensate for that, rather than asking them to come up with the solution for you. That is the easiest way to essentially get canned, okay? Honestly. Now, how do you avoid the meeting turning into a blame session, blame-seeking session? I've already told you that. As a project manager, you don't want to point fingers. So even if there are people on your team that were totally wrong, right, or messed up completely, and now that's the reason why things happened, you're not pointing the finger at them, okay? You really want to generalize the fact that there is an issue. We are fixing it. I don't want to get into a number of details unless you ask me about that, but I'm not going to put anyone on Front Street. And why are you doing this? You know, you're not really saving anyone, you're saving your project, okay? As a project manager, it's okay to take heat for the team as long as the team has your back after you take that heat. The worst thing you could do is start to point fingers at other people and then have them say, oh, I don't like that project manager anymore. I'm gonna delay the work anyway. Why? Because I can get away with that. They're gonna be blamed for the project being late because they have to go to steering, not me. So just remember, you want to protect your team in these scenarios as well, because you're going to need them to do the work to get all the, all of your things back on track within that project, right? So just take your time, understand what you're delivering is not the problems, but the solution to steering. And if you do it that way, that meeting is going to be a lot easier for you than you just going in there laying some problems on the table for leadership to figure out for you. And again, that's probably the easiest way for you to get canned if you do this on a regular basis. All right. Last, what do you do differently when the internal steering group versus when you have to? And it's the same thing for an external customer, right? Like if I'm paying for a product as a customer and you come to me as the customer, and just put yourself in this situation. You come to me as the customer and you just tell me, hey man, I know I was supposed to deliver a fully cut lawn, but I ran out of gas and I was only able to cut 3/4 of the lawn. As the customer, what would I expect you to do, right? As the manager of cutting my lawn, I would expect you to go to the gas station with the money that I just paid you to cut my lawn, buy gas, and put it in your lawnmower and then finish the lawn, right? But I don't want to explain that to you. I want you to actually come up with that solution, that simple solution on your own, and then go do it, right? Because if I have to tell you that, then that'll probably be the last time that you cut my lawn. Get what I'm saying? Moving on to the next one. All right, this is a pretty simple, easy one to answer. How many of you use MS Project as a junior level project manager? Is this something the senior PM usually locks at your organization and you give them the status updates? Okay, well, that seems like a weird question, but I'll try to answer it. So, MS Project is just one tool of many that you can use to manage projects, okay? The reason why I like MS Project is because it kind of focuses in specifically to project management. Now, a lot of the tools that you find there can be confusing to use in some ways. So I recommend if you're gonna use MS Project, watch some YouTube videos on it, get familiar with the application itself because it is a bit unique to any other Microsoft product that you use. With that being said, there's tons of other tools that you can use. Monday.com, there's web portals that you can use. You can create your own schedule in Excel if you really want to. But ultimately, all MS Project does for you very well is take the list of action items or different tasks within phases that you have to lay out your milestones in a Gantt chart and to give you a calendar, which is essentially the same thing that Monday.com does, but just in a prettier format, right? So whatever tool you're using, unless it's an institutional mandate, get familiar with a number of them, right? MS Planner does the same thing as MS Project. So get familiar with a number of different tools. Use the one that makes the most sense to you and that translates well to your team. One thing I can say about MS Project is that sometimes it translates well, other times it doesn't. The main question you want to really ask yourself when it comes down to how you're building your schedule is, do I need to present this to other people? And if so, what's the best format to present it in? So with that being said, if MS Project works where you can present a Gantt chart to leadership and they like what they see, while you track all of the individual dependencies and tasks in a more granular form, then use that. If Monday.com presents a prettier interface and they like to see that, use that. If you have to present a PowerPoint roadmap to someone, in leadership because they interact with PowerPoint presentations better than MS Project, use that. The key here is to make sure that you're using what your stakeholders will feed into, not necessarily what you want to use all the time. Now, granted, there are two sides of this equation, right? So you have what you're presenting versus what you're actively using to manage. In a lot of ways, I've built projects in MS Project and then converted those projects into Excel spreadsheets because they're easier to manipulate when it comes down to the data. Versus MS Project, where if I need to change dates or see how dependencies all align, I may use MS Project. If I'm just moving tasks around, I may use Excel for that because it's easier to just move those cells around according to whatever dates I want things to land on. With experience, you'll get a lot more in tune with what works for you versus what doesn't. But as a junior, I would say experiment, man. There really is no wrong answer when it comes down to this. Now, as far as status updates are concerned, those are going to be more aligned, not necessarily to your schedule, but what's actually happening, say, within a 2-week to 1 month period on your project. The only way that those two things will kind of correlate is if you're kind of calling out the things that should be happening in that schedule in your status update, but you'll never copy and paste your schedule into a status update. All right, so just take that as a word of advice. Moving on to the next one.